Thank you for allowing me to be with you today. I will tell you we have some significant challenges to overcome. Since I've been governor, which has been a little over 2 months, we've had tornadoes and floods. We've had a special session where we did some good work but came up short. We're in a regular session, and my prediction is that at the conclusion of the regular session or at some point soon thereafter, we will be back in another special session because we just have that many challenges before us. And so I'm going to talk through this. I don't know that the format calls for questions. I typically try to allow them. So I'll take it now. Let's go start thinking of questions you might want to ask me. And I'm not going to tell you that I'm happy to take questions. I'll tell you that at the end, depending on what questions I've received. Just about the fiscal situation. Fact of the matter is, Louisiana has the largest budget deficit in history. It's $2 billion is what we started off with for next year. We had a $940 million deficit for the current year. Now, due to the work of the legislature, and with a lot of cuts, some one-time money from BP payments to the state, the settlement to the state for this year, which is $200 million. And for those of you who are, like me, worried about the coast, not a single dollar of that was meant to go to coastal restoration. That is to reimburse the state for out-of-pocket expenses associated with this bill. But those $200 million are going to be moved towards the shortfall. $128 million from the Budget Stabilization Fund. Y'all know it as the Rainy Day Fund. We did some cuts. In addition to the cuts that were done in November, we did about $170 million more in cuts in the current year. And then we raised some revenue. With the revenue that we raised, we came in about $70 million short, which is a big number. We're going to be making an announcement tomorrow as to how we're going to close the rest of that gap. Going forward to next year, with the work we did in the special session, starting off with a $2 billion shortfall, the shortfall is now $750 million. Obviously much less than $2 billion, and that's a great thing, but $750 million shortfall in state general fund is still a huge number. And there is no way to fashion a budget that adequately funds what 99% of the people in this room would believe to be priorities for the state of Louisiana. It just can't be done. And we're going to go through the exercise because the Constitution requires us to balance our budget. We have to do that with the revenue most recently recognized by the Revenue Estimating Conference, and that's what we're going to do. And it is not going to be a pleasant exercise, and you're going to see some agency heads in higher education announcing some very painful cuts that will not serve us well, cuts that will not set us up for success in the future. And that is why I believe a second special session sometime after the regular session is on the horizon. I just need to make sure we do better at the second special session than we did at the first. And we did some good work. And the vast majority of legislators in the House and the Senate worked with me in good faith. At the end of the day, of the 23 proposals that I made, they favorably acted on 18 of those. So if this were a batting average or something that would be good, the problem is some of the things they didn't do were some of the most important things. And that's why we came up short. But we're going to get back to work. And I am absolutely confident that we are going to fix our problems. We are going to put the state on a stable path toward a more prosperous future, one where our children are going to be able to stay in Louisiana and be successful. I ran for governor for a number of reasons, but chief among them is the fact that I have too many people telling me that they believe as young kids they have to leave Louisiana to have the best shot at a great education, to get a good job, or have a rewarding career. We cannot afford that in Louisiana. We don't have a margin for error that will allow that. And we better nourish our kids right here and make sure that they have every opportunity to be successful. And while government can never and should never be in the business of guaranteeing equality of outcomes, we had better be in the business of guaranteeing equality of opportunity. And we're not doing that very well today. These budget problems are going to make it harder to do better in the near future. But I am convinced that with the work we're going to do this year and with the work that we're going to do in the fiscal session in 2017 around comprehensive tax reform and budget reform, that we are going to be on a more stable path to a better, more prosperous future. Between now and then, I am asking the state of Louisiana to engage in some shared sacrifice. Always easier to talk about than it is to put into practice, because I could readily get people shaking their heads, yes, we need to engage in shared sacrifice. But when you put something on the table that says it's their time to share in the sacrifice, you know, there's a little different attitude about that. But we have to do it. We don't have choices about that. And there is nothing that brings me pleasure to be governor, whether it's in the first 2 months or the last 2 months, asking for more revenue. I did not want to be in this position. But I know that it's the right thing to do under the circumstances, and that we're going to be much better off as a result of it than we would be if we simply tried to cut our way out of this mess. And in fact, I will tell you, we cannot cut our way out of this mess. When you see what these cuts are going to look like when we unveil them in a couple of weeks, and look, the legislature gets to do its job, and they're going to move some money around, but at the end of the day, we don't have printing presses. We're not going to print money in Louisiana. And so it's going to be a very difficult thing to do. But I do want to talk about some specific policy initiatives that we have as well. First is the Medicaid expansion. You all probably know by now that I support Medicaid expansion. I have for a number of years. I don't understand the wisdom in paying taxes to the federal government that get redistributed to 30 other states so that their working poor have health care coverage while ours go without, when we have probably the least healthy population in the United States of America, some of the worst health outcomes in the United States of America, and a higher percentage of people without insurance than just about any other state in the country. I also know that our providers need access to reimbursements so they can keep their doors open. The hospital emergency room closest to where we are right now is closed because too many people were going to that emergency room without reimbursement dollars following. That will happen all over the state without the Medicaid expansion. And if you think that I am exaggerating, I wish I had to show it to you. There is a map of rural hospitals that have closed around the country. And then I want you to overlay on that map those states that accepted the Medicaid expansion and those that didn't, and see the correlation. Secondly, and this is critically important in a time like this, in the first year alone, we're going to save $100 million. Why are we going to save $100 million? We're already paying for care for the uninsured, but we're paying for it where we're having to pay 38 cents on the dollar, and we're going to swap that out where for the first 6 months of next year, we're going to pay 0 cents on the dollar, and for the 6 months after that, we're going to pay 2 cents on the dollar. It just makes sense. And not only are we going to save money next year, but by doing it, we're going to avoid steep cost increases down the road when the DSH dollars go away. And by the way, that's how we primarily fund our safety net charity hospital system, is with DSH dollars. Because DSH dollars are going to go away because the whole scheme of the federal legislation means you're supposed to have fewer uninsured people. And so the money that is being allocated to the states to take care of uninsured folks is going to be reduced. If that's how we're providing our safety net care, and it's going to go away, we better expand the Medicaid program between now and then. And we're talking about working poor people. The vast majority of the people who will be insured under Medicaid expansion come July 1st, because I've already signed the executive order, belong to families with working folks. That's why they don't qualify for Medicaid today. So I think for many, many reasons, it's the right thing to do. We have a lot of support around the state, not just from faith-based groups and from the working poor, but also from our hospitals, our rural hospitals, the managed care organizations that administer Medicaid. And that's another point you all should know, is we don't have the old traditional fee-for-service in Louisiana anymore. We actually have private health insurance companies that are administering the program on a capitated basis. So when you hear somebody in the future tell you that we can solve our budget if only we wouldn't allow people on Medicaid to go to the emergency room to seek acne treatments, because I've heard someone say that recently, someone like our treasurer. The fact of the matter is, it doesn't cost us any more because we now have a privatized system on a capitated basis where we're paying a per member per month amount to these insurance companies, and the risk of fraud, waste, and abuse is on them because that detracts from the profits that they're going to seek, and that's why we did it. So I just ask you to look at it, and even if you came in here today with an idea that you were opposed to the Medicaid expansion, I'm asking you to take another look at it, not because we won't do it if you disagree with me, but because it's the right thing to do. And I would like, obviously, to have support wherever we can get support for it. With respect to the legislative agenda, raise the age. Right now, Louisiana, the default rule is if you commit a crime and you're 17 years old, you're going to be treated as an adult. We are out of step with the rest of the country, and given what we now know about human development, specifically brain development, that is not the right way to treat our children. It's costing us too much money, and the default rule ought to be that if you're 17 or younger when you commit a crime, you will be treated as a juvenile, leaving DAs such as Hill or Moore with the authority on a case-by-case basis to choose to prosecute the individual as an adult. That's the right way to go. And so we have, as part of my package this year, and it's a down payment on what will be comprehensive sentencing reform and criminal justice reform that you're going to see legislation introduced next year in 2017. This is a down payment on that. You all know from the legal system that we now have a situation in Louisiana where we have many people who were juveniles sentenced to life without parole. We know that that is not something that the Supreme Court will allow us to do. We have to figure out as a state how we're going to allow these individuals to at least have some meaningful parole eligibility consideration. I am working with the Supreme Court, with the District Attorneys Association and others to make sure that we can do that in a smart way that is meaningful, but also doesn't overtax our court system, our legal, because as you all know, with respect to the indigent defenders especially, we're having significant issues. And so we're going to do that. I hope that we will be able to come to a consensus on that relatively soon. But that is somewhat related to raise the age as well. With respect to the Department of Children and Family Services, some of you may do child in need of care cases. I am going to revamp that agency so that people are going to be working where their specializations are. And that's a recommendation that I'm going to accept from the transition team. We have individuals right now in DCFS who have certain expertise, but they're not being allowed to work in those areas, and they're having to do things that are not in their area of expertise. And so we're going to change that. I want you to know that I do support a Real ID Act in Louisiana that will allow individuals the opportunity to make a decision for themselves. If they don't want a Real ID, they can opt to get an old one. And then if one day they're denied the ability to get on an airplane, they will have done that to themselves. But for all of the people in Louisiana who want a Real ID compliant identification card to make sure that that doesn't happen, I think you ought to have that ability. That bill has passed and was passed previously, and Governor Jindal vetoed it. I think that's something that we ought to do. I will tell you that during the campaign, I was in this very room in a forum, and we had all of the four candidates for governor. One of the questions we were asked in that forum was, do you support an increase in the minimum wage? It might surprise you to know that I was the only one of the four who said that I did. But it was not lost on me that day that the only people in this room working for minimum wage were the people who were putting food down on the tables. $7.25 in 2016 is not a meaningful minimum wage. It hasn't changed since 2009. We now have 30 states, I think it's 30 states plus DC, that have a higher minimum wage than that set by Congress. I think it's time that we move forward in Louisiana as well. And so what I am proposing is an increase over 2 years to $8.50, going to $8 on January of next year, and then an additional 50 cents thereafter. I just think it's the right thing to do, and especially when you understand how many families in poverty in Louisiana are headed up by mothers, single working mothers, working for minimum wage. And the next time you stop to get gas in your car, and you probably pay at the pump, but you pay that $40 or $50, whatever it is, and you go inside and you get that bag of chips and that soft drink or the beer, whatever you buy. I'm not being judgmental. Think to yourself what it just cost you to buy that. And then think how long it would take at minimum wage to be able to make that purchase. And then think about the lady or the gentleman that you give the money to, working for that. It's just the right thing to do, in my estimation. And in 2014, all across the country, at the same time, when very conservative Republican governors and senators were being elected, in many states, they voted for a higher minimum wage that went into effect on January 1st of this year. I think it's the right thing to do to follow suit in Louisiana. And I know that this concept is supported by 2/3 of the people in our state, as is the idea that Louisiana should not be at the very bottom of this list as well. Or we could be at the top, depending on how you want to do it. But we're at the top of too many bad lists, the bottom of too many good ones. The disparity between what women make and what men make doing the same job is bigger in Louisiana than anywhere else. 67 cents on the dollar. That's just wrong. And it's not just wrong for my 2 daughters, it's wrong for everybody. And it's not just wrong for females. Remember, we've got about half of the families living in poverty headed up by single females. This is about family values. It's about enacting policies that actually value families. And so I think it's the right thing to do. And many people say, well, we already have laws on the books that are supposed to address that. I agree. We have laws on the books that are supposed to address it. But clearly the laws are not working very well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be the worst in the country. And so I think we need to do better on this as well. So I support real, meaningful, equal pay legislation. With respect to civil justice, and I didn't do any criminal law as a lawyer because my brother was a sheriff. I didn't think it'd be a good idea for me to be cross-examining him or his deputies. But I did practice civil law. Most of my work in my small country practice in AMET was on the plaintiff side. And for these young Broncos over here, I would suggest you give that some consideration. It's a good way to make a living. But whatever side you're on with respect to civil litigation, I do not anticipate either this year or at any time while I'm your governor that there's going to be significant movement in either direction in terms of what's traditionally called tort reform. I just don't see that happening. I'm not going to say that we won't make some changes because I think some change is always inevitable, and sometimes we can agree upon things that we would like to accomplish and that sort of thing. But what you've seen in the recent past termed as tort reform typically are not things that I support with respect to things like changing the jury trial threshold and some of the other proposals that you've seen. So I don't envision that we're going to go in that direction. But I always support reform. I just don't always agree that what's cloaked as reform actually will improve the system. And you know, if you get to label what you're doing as reform, there's this, I guess, rebuttable presumption that you're doing the right thing. But I never have agreed with that. So with that, I just want to tell you that I remain very optimistic, excited about our future. I know that we're going to do great things in Louisiana, but we've got to get through this tough period right now. And I want you to share my optimism, but I also want you to share my resolve to get through it. I'm asking you to work with me, to communicate with us, to understand that in times like this, we do have to go through a period of shared sacrifice. But around the corner is a much better day for our state, especially for our children. And so with that, I don't know if I'm too late to take any questions or not, or whether you even want me to take questions.